Thanks for joining. I'm Claudio Petucco from LIST, here with Gustavo Martin Larrea Gallegos from LIST, and also with the support of Theodore Simmons from Taskscape. So in the next hour and a half, we'll present the decision support tool FrameTest, explaining the context and rationale of its development, how it runs, and most importantly, collect your feedback to shape the next development. The goal of FrameTest is simple: make it easier to compare credible policy options and justify choices with transparent assumption and uncertainty. A quick note on logistics. So today we are recording to help colleagues catching up later on. Please keep mics muted and your camera off during the presentation. We'll invite you during the Q&A sessions to activate them. Drop question in the chat as they occur to you so you don't lose them. We'll collect the clarifying ones right after the demo. And we'll also share the slide deck, the link to the survey at the end, including the support materials and the slides. Okay. So here's how we'll flow. We'll give some, initially I will give the floor to Theo in a few seconds for some introductory words on Recodo, the setting of the framework projects and that supports our work. Then after that, I will ask you and share a link. It's already in the chat, but I will tell you later. There is also a QR code, just to know a quick pulse, to know who is in the room and your level of computer literacy. So to target a little bit our presentation, and then I will go through the policy context and how to give you some ideal use cases that we had in mind when developing this tool. Which will help you go through then the presentation of the model and the assumption behind the tool. So how FrameTest works and how that will be done by my colleague Gustavo. After that, we will have a live demonstration of the tool and followed by a quick Q&A for clarification. Then the most important part for us is to collect your feedbacks. Again, we will reuse the same link that we shared in the chat, and we would like to have your feedbacks and ideas on what you saw. Finally, Gustavo will introduce some future steps and the roadmap for the tool, and we will conclude with an open panel discussion in which we will give you the floor to have immediate feedbacks and discuss with us. And this will conclude our webinar, or let's say interactive workshop, as I prefer to call it. So I would like to invite Theo to take the floor to introduce us about Recodo, the framework projects, and the upcoming initiatives.
Thank you very much, Claudio. So I'm coming from Taskscape, which is a sort of communications knowledge exchange partner in the H2020 FRAMEwork consortium. And I'm just going to briefly contextualize for you the Recodo platform on which FrameTest has a landing page and sits alongside various other tools and resources that are outputs from the Horizon project. So the platform was built and developed by the International Institute of Applied Systems Analysis in Austria, with support from Taskscape and from the wider project consortium. And it hosts a network of pilot farmer clusters, which are 11 clusters developed following best practices out of a network of over 100 in the United Kingdom, which gained momentum over a period of about 10 years and have been very interesting for trying to deploy more landscape catchment level biodiversity sensitive farming interventions facilitated by a central facilitator and focus really on regional concerns and farmer specific farming and conservation interests. So the platform hosts these clusters who have profiles, and there's various media and blogs on the platform that take you behind the scenes and on the ground of the various clusters. But it also has those specific resources I mentioned, like FrameTest, which are outputs. And these resources are meant to be for stakeholders inside and orbiting these clusters or similar collective approaches. And they include things like, I think we have someone on here today from the University of Hertfordshire, and they have a tool on there which is farmland ecosystem assessment tool, which is spatially assessing farmland ecosystems. So there are various specific tools like that, which have been deployed in various ways. I think we also have Professor Iris Bonnet on here today from Czechia, and the cluster which the Czech University of Life Sciences is involved in have deployed FEAST in various ways in their cluster to spatially assess their ecosystems, their habitat provision, things like this. So beyond those specific sort of targeted tools that are outputs of our Horizon project, it also has a resource finder with over 200 resources, again, focused on these stakeholders orbiting collective approaches and researching and NGOs working in these areas. So that has a specific focus on the material of other useful EU projects that have been operating alongside us, such as our sister project Showcase, as well as past EU projects, and also collaborators like the Ecosystem Services Partnership and the FSD, and they're the biggest global database of ecosystem valuations. So again, it's a place where you can find research and resources and tools that support your activity on these issues. So I think the other thing to draw attention to is biodiversity databases, so information on biodiversity in regions across Europe. That is also featured quite heavily on Recodo. And this is based on feedback from farmer cluster facilitators within the Framework project, who really like the baseline survey work that they did with professional surveyors that have been part of one of the strands on Framework, along with various citizen science and community and farmer-led monitoring. But they were very interested in how they could get a sense of the biodiversity in their landscape and region prior to the project. And many of the clusters are quite focused on organic or sustainable farming, but many of them include conventional farmers or facilitators who are new to this approach. So there was a real need for them to understand during the 5 years of the project how the period of Framework and the interventions they were making, the monitoring they were doing, fitted into the sort of historic trends of biodiversity in their region. So I think Claudio is going to tell you a little bit more about the project and perhaps how the agent-based modeling and some of the things that I know folks here today will be interested in relate to the broader research and sort of research in action picture. But hopefully that's a useful little potted history of Recodo. I think I'll just close by saying in the last 12-month period, it's had about over 1,000 active users. And it's very interesting for us to see also the increase in AI bot activity, which is from the middle of the summer is now being recorded by Cloudflare and various providers, hosting providers. And it's very interesting to see the various information on Recodo being used in responses to AI queries. And we're very pleased both with the Framework website blog, Recodo's blog, and indeed the resource finder that because it's from a consortium of universities and NGOs, the AI is clearly preferring or viewing as reputable the resources that we have collated or created. So I think that's going to be a really interesting growth area for EU projects like this. And we're very pleased that IASA have been able to guarantee a certain degree of legacy to ensure that information remains available for people, but also for AI as the way that we use the internet and find information online continues to evolve at high speed. So thank you very much for listening, and I will hand back to Claudio to mention a bit more about the project and of course dive into FrameTest itself. Thank you, Claudio.
Thank you, Theo. I just take the chance to remind you of September 24th. There is another Recodo in Real Life event webinar inside Farmer Clusters. So from 12:30 to 2:30 European Central Time. So yeah, you can sign up and join that. It will be much more information on the life and the real day-to-day life activities of the farmer clusters and much more. So go to Recodo and find out more about that, and you will find there the link to the registration as well. So I want to again thank Theo for this introduction. You already described a little bit the work within the framework project that was a Horizon 2020 project funded by the European Commission. And the idea of the project, as said, is really to bring together farmers. And the premise is really that coordination beats isolation. So by providing facilitation, monitoring framework, share way of working, information sharing, materials, tools, and so on. We try to follow up under the 4 years of the project, 11 clusters across Europe. The main activity was really try to implement biodiversity-sensitive agricultural practices and combine with biodiversity monitoring and support for those farmers engaged in the farmer clusters. And as said, then all this material has been collected and organized in a very user-friendly way in the Recodo portal. But what was really interested from our research objectives in the project was really try to have a systemic assessment of the farmer cluster approach. And to do that, we needed to combine not only the ecological interaction, and so how biodiversity respond to the different management practices, but also the social interaction, so the network, who are how are the farmers exchanging information, what are their connection to the wider society, and also another layer is the economic layer. So the supply chain, what type of input do they use? Is changing the biodiversity? So applying these biodiversity sensitive practices, changing their needs in terms of pesticide, fertilizers. As you could imagine, trying to assess and analyze those systems is quite a challenging task. But and the idea was really to try to build a tool able to describe that complexity. But before going into further detail, I would like to do a quick pause. So in the chat, you will find already a link. If it's easier for you, you can use your phone and the QR code on the slide that should bring you to our survey. And there I will give you just 1 minute. I don't want to, it's just 2 quick questions. I don't want to break the rhythm, but please fill in the question and we will see what type of audience is with us today. And you will see it's just 2 questions, one of what you do and one of about your level of computer literacy. So I will give you 1 minute. Please fill it in and then I will continue. I'm in presentation mode, so I do not see the chat. Please, Theo or Gustavo, if somebody is having difficulties to access and is writing in the chat, if you can react, I'm just saying. So 15 seconds left. It's just the first part of the survey, so 2 questions. Yeah, we will go to the rest of the survey later on. Okay, so I think 1 minute is over. I can continue. Thank you for your answers. So the motivation, as I was trying to say before, was really to try to combine and understand all these sociological, economic, and ecological interaction that are happening, that are related to the farmer cluster, but not only. Is really when we want to represent the processes in our agroecological system. That's what we have to take into account. But unfortunately, there is a lack of explicit model and data to predict the outcomes of implementing such a system. And therefore, as a consequence, we have to fill those gaps using a what-if approach. So define reasonable assumption and explore the potential outcomes of the farmer cluster system. And this was really what drove our, let's say, research agenda over in this project. And to give you some more practical questions, we tried to come up with, and these were a little bit the use cases that we had in our mind when we developed this decision support tool. And we were trying to, so I would like to give you this example to help you then better understand our choices in terms of how we build a model and what the user interface looks like and what are the outputs of the model. So, but let's put in the shoes of our policymaker or decision maker. And the objective, the first objective that you could have that is specific in the context of framework is to test whether the farmer cluster approach outperforms the farm by farm actions. For instance, if we want to improve connectivity. So specific target for a landscape. Let's observe the two approaches. So the ideally, we would have to test two scenarios, one with the cluster, one without the cluster, and use maybe the same budget and the same type of measure to improve the connectivity. And ideally, what we would like to see as a user that has this type of problem is to see how the chain, in the two scenarios, the connectivity index is affected. What are potential co-benefits? So if we use this specific measure to improve connectivity, are we also having gains in terms of pollination or natural predation? And what are the costs per each connectivity point that we are gaining? But this, of course, we will also need to know how the uncertainty of the result and how initial parameters or specific characteristics of the landscape or the farmer affect the observed results. And this ideally in real time. So this was a first type of use case we had in mind when developing this. So test different scenarios with or without a cluster. But we could also use the tool with or without a farmer cluster, but to analyze, for instance, cutting pesticide via natural predation, a kind of integrated pest management surrogate. So the objective as a policymaker would be to reduce the pesticide use without unacceptable yield risk or economic losses. And the approach would be, okay, let's try to trade off the predation efficiency and the use of pesticides. So how good is the natural system in predating pests and therefore reducing losses of yields compared to the use of chemical pesticide? So again, we do not have information on the predation efficiency. This is maybe a parameter that is not available in our area, or there are no exact study for the crop. So we would like to know a little bit how, by changing this assumption that is very important, is very central, could affect the rate of pesticide use, or right, and identify some break-even points for integrated pest management. But again, this predation efficiency maybe is not the only relevant parameter, because it could be related to how much habitat have the species that are enabling pest control able to find in our current landscape. So this is, we might want to know how our results change depending on the habitat availability, or maybe a combination of 2 or 3 or more parameters, right? So again, how could we generate a tool able to support this type of decision given the lack of information on certain parameters and the uncertainty on some other parameters? Another case studies that we could think about is, for instance, answering the question of which eco-schemes deliver more biodiversity per euro, right, under a fixed budget. So should we go for flower strip, hedgerows, or a combination of the two? And what is the mix that delivers the most for a given budget? So again, the objective of the question is really maximize ecosystem services gains under per euro, so the cost effectiveness of our intervention given a budget. And the approach would be to have realistic scenarios with different cost of implementation of the different measures for the farmers, but also different likelihood of adoption that will depend maybe on the risk perception of the farmers, the ability or the information that they have about the different how to implement and what are the risk and benefits and the risk of opportunities of this type of subsidies and eco scheme. So again, as an output, as a policymaker, we would like to have some indicators of the different gains. So for different KPIs that we want to monitor in terms of ecosystem services, farm performance, in terms of farmer economic performance, and the recommended mix for a given budget. Again, there is some uncertainty we would like to have a grasp of, right? So show how the sensitivity to adoption rates and unit cost affect the final indicators. So I hope this can give you a little bit of concrete use cases that was actually what we used to develop our tool. So in general, before going into the how we did it, so why we did it. So what we think is what FrameTest can deliver to policy and decision makers. So editable assumption and visible uncertainty ranges to answer to the what-if scenarios and in real time. So in an ergonomic and easy way that doesn't require any coding or advanced level of computer literacy, being able to change the result of this simulation and observe in real time how the final KPI will be affected. Okay, and then another thing could be interesting to have is, beside that, is also to keep track and compare. So it's nice to see the variation, but it's also say, okay, if we have this initial condition, what will be my final outcome on the parameters I want to observe, and that are what I'm really interested. Could be euro per, so how much it costs to increase different ecosystem services or biodiversity indicators, and compare in different conditions with different level of schemes, for instance, payment per hectare, how the final result will be affected. And finally, to have data and graphs to be exported and used to support short policy briefs. Okay, so with this introduction, I hope now you have an overview of what we were aiming with the tool. And now I will give the floor to Gustavo to present how we implemented, how we did it in practice. And after that, we will go through a live demo. So we will have not just theory, but also some demonstration in real time of how the tool works. So Gustavo, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. You listen to me, right? The audio is okay?
Yeah.
Oh, great. So next one, please. So as Claudio mentioned, our main issue here is that we were trying to represent a system that is clearly defined as a complex system because of this social, economic, and ecological interaction. So in this study, the first objective we have was to represent this model, the farmer cluster system and the agricultural system in general, not only considering the ecological metrics that we are interested in studying, but also by adopting a life cycle perspective. So one of the first steps we wanted to do was to incorporate this notion, life cycle impacts also of these particular actions. And for that, we selected a modeling paradigm called agent-based modeling. And for those that are not familiar with that, is basically a bottom-up approach in which we represent or simulate the functioning of each farm and then we let them interact in a series of simulation. What we do at the end of the simulation is we observe the results, we observe the changes, and then we iterate to understand how the system changes when we change some parameters. So we came up with this model called FrameABM, and it's a highly customizable model that unfortunately requires a lot of effort to explore parameters and to understand which parameters can be affecting the final outcome. And that's why we had as a second objective, next one please, to develop a surrogate model or meta model that could facilitate the exploration of parameters, that could somehow embed what this ABM model has and give us some insights in a faster manner. And that is what FrameTest is. So FrameTest is basically built upon the results of the agent-based model we have using some machine learning techniques. And Claudio, and basically it consists on taking the data from a big number of simulations that we generate with FrameABM and training some machine learning models so we can use them in FrameTest. The advantage of these surrogate models or meta models is that we don't need to run the simulation again, and we get fast predictions. So this is the logic. So first I'm going to talk about the model, what FrameABM is actually modeling. Next one, please. So the system is a network that is composed by farmers, the ecosystem, and market agents. In our model, every farmer belongs to a cluster, and they are committed to implement some biodiversity-sensitive actions. Claudio mentioned some examples, planting flower strips, could be hedgerows, but they do this in addition to their conventional farming activities. The important thing here is that the selection of actions has an impact on landscape and biodiversity as well, but it can also have a feedback on the technical characteristics of the system. And this is precisely the feedback that we were interested in and studied. Next one, please. So I'll explain very briefly how the feedback looks like. So every farmer in our model is trying to solve a sourcing problem, which consists on determining what to produce and how much of it to produce. So before a farmer joins a cluster, the farmer has a business as usual operational configuration, meaning that a certain number of technologies available, a certain amount of decisions to consider. Once the farmer joins a cluster, what happens is that through communication, interaction in the social network, the farmer expands the decision space to consider new alternatives, such as planted orchards or flower strips or any other action that we want to simulate. And this is precisely what the model is about. We want to understand what are the consequences of introducing new actions into the farmer decision space. Now, the important thing about the actions is that they affect the landscape, and at the same time, they affect some ecosystem services, such as natural predation or pollination. These have a direct effect on some technological factors, such as pesticide consumption or yield, meaning that, next one, please, we are dealing with a system in which there's a high potential of substituting technological capital with natural capital. So that's why we were very interested on not only studying the ecosystem metrics, but also the life cycle assessment metrics, because this is a system that is affecting also the farmer's operational configuration. Next one, please. So basically, the model consists on a group of farmers that operate on normal basis, and they produce goods and they sell it to a market. They do it every year during 12 years of simulation. And the sequence that you see here is basically the steps that the farmers are going to follow every year of simulation, each farmer. So it starts by, every farmer starts by selecting the strategy. Next one, please. So they select the strategy they want to take that year, which determines how these actions are going to enter the farmer decision space. So this is a more cognitive process. And to model this behavior or to have a computational representation of this cognitive process, we use a framework called FarmMind. In FarmMine, well, the FarmMine model basically depends on, well, it states that the strategy selection depends on two endogenous variables: the satisfaction, which is related with the income, and the dissimilarity, which is related with how the neighbors look, what the neighbors do in terms of action, and also how much they make in terms of revenue. So the logic here is that depending on how a farmer feels about these two variables, he or she can choose to repeat, which is to do the same actions that were done in the previous year, optimize, which means look for other actions even outside the social network, imitate, which is look to the neighbors and mimic or copy the actions that they are doing, or live in the cluster, which means to remove these actions from the normal operational configuration and leave the cluster, basically. So next one, please. Once the farmer decides the strategy and selects the actions that are included into the decision space, the farmer has to produce. And for this, we are relying on a framework called Africa, which is a mathematical optimization framework that we use to calculate the inputs and outputs in a production model. So we use this framework to calculate life cycle impacts, but we modify to include also some natural capital as part of the decision process. So what we do here is basically do some income maximization, or we assume that the farmer, once the decision space has been set, wants to do income maximization. And once this is done, the production combination is set, and the farmer produces. Yeah. Next one, please. So once it's produced, it's going to sell the goods to the market. In this case, it's modeled as a wholesaler that buys all the products at a given price. The price is exogenous to the model. It's not coming from the interactions. And the farmer will recalculate the satisfaction, meaning that it's going to look on how much money he or she made that year. Also, it's going to look on the past income. It's going to determine this variable. And also the dissimilarity. It's going to look on what actions did the other farmers took this year and how much money they made as well. And well, basically just recalculate these variables. And we finally account for all the life cycle impacts that were all the life cycle impact emissions in this year, and also the ecosystem service metrics. So for the ecosystem service metrics, we used a methodology developed by Silivakis, in which they have a quantitative manner of calculating metrics related to soil erosion, pollination, pest control, and carbon content, considering the farm characteristics, meaning that in the decision process, farmer can decide to convert arable land into, let's say, hedgerow, which means that the available arable land is reduced and the farm landscape changes, and this affects these metrics. So yes, so basically this is how the model is working. We have we populate a number of farmers. It's a parameter, number of agents. And with the model, next one, please.
The ecosystem services methodology is based on, it's a streamlined version of the one used in FEAST. Just to mention, that was the tool that was developed also in the framework project by our colleagues in Work Package 5, so that there is a consistency within the tools that we use the same methodology. Just a note.
Sorry for that. So for the model to test it, we let's call it recalibrated with some technical and economic data of a Luxembourgish farming system. For that, we relied on life cycle inventories and market prices and costs taken from other projects that we have at list. And we started to run simulations to understand how the system behaves, basically. So let's not forget that this is a highly parametric model. So we try to feel with as much realistic data we have, and for those parameters that we don't know or we cannot calculate now, we did some sensitivity analysis. But in this example, what I show you now, basically what we see in the figure is that we simulate agents to join the cluster, next one please, after the 4th year of operation. We did that to basically let them operate in business as usual conditions. So when they calculate their satisfaction and the dissimilarity is done, that is done in reference to normal production. So as we can see in this figure, if we take the ecotoxicity life cycle impact, we see that once the farmer joins the farmer cluster, the impact reduces until reaching a plateau. This plateau occurs because at this particular time step, or year 8, the farmer decides to leave. The reduction occurs in this case because farmer decides to change arable land for hedgerows. Well, not precisely hedgerow, but increases the natural pest control, and that substitutes some pesticide consumption. Pesticide, it's important. Production and application of pesticides might not be so relevant for impact categories like climate change, but they are very important for categories like ecotoxicity. So we can definitely see the consequences of implementing these actions for this farmer. Now, when we wanted to explore what happened and why the farmer basically left the cluster, next one, please. We can use the model to also see the evolution of the different strategies during the simulation in the whole system. As you can see, this is showing the count of agents per strategy. Next one, please. Yes. So the yellow one indicates optimize, meaning that around 40 agents of the 50 at this from year 5 until the end, they were just trying to optimize, meaning that they were not satisfied with the income, but they were okay with the dissimilarity, meaning that they were fine. Their dissimilarity threshold was pretty high, so they were okay and they were operating. On the other hand, if we see the blue line, we can observe that almost 10 farmers decide to leave because they were not satisfied with the income, but also the dissimilarity index exceeded their threshold. So then we can observe how the variation of these different behavioral parameters can also condition the success of the adoption of the actions in addition to the monetary factors. And next one, please. So something that we can also see with the model is the evolution of the implementation of the different actions. In this case, it's represented as a land transformation, meaning how many hectares in the system were converted from arable land to hedgerow area, to margin area, to semi-natural habitat, or to buffer area. Next one, please. As we can see, once the farmers join the cluster, they enter into a stage of discovering. So they, in our simulation, they start with a random action. They see the action, and then they see what other neighbors have, and the system starts to stabilize to having the action with the highest subsidy to be the predominant one. This is not always the situation. It's also conditioned by the social network. So meaning that the bigger the network and the more dense it is, the faster the different actions are going to be shared among farmers. But in this example, as we can see, semi-natural habitat started lower, but with the years, it basically dominated because in this example, we tested with a high subsidy for the action. Something that maybe I forgot to mention is that in the model, we give a subsidy for the implementation of the action. Since farmers are committed to do to implement these actions, we are also testing what happens if they receive 0 subsidy or if they receive a certain amount. Next one, please. So as you can see, this highly parametric model can be sometimes hard to explore, and even for us, a bit complicated sometimes to calibrate it and to find the parameter region in which the model is behaving the way we consider as reasonable and adequate for our question. And because of that, what we wanted to do was to build a surrogate model based on the results of this ABM. And this surrogate model, FrameTest, is basically like a mixing console in which you knob each one, you tune each one of the knobs, and you identify and you get a prediction of a particular KPI or key performance indicator. Next one, please. So for that, we first built a virtual farm landscape generator, which is basically computer code that helps us to populate different fields and farms from generic landscape features. So we use this generator to populate a big number of random farms or random fields, and we then sample some relevant parameters that were affecting the system outputs, such as network connectivity, some production features, efficiency of substitution, price, subsidies, and others. With this data, we started a lot of simulations, and we came up with a synthetic database. So the synthetic database was then fed into machine learning pipelines to generate models that were predicting the KPIs of interest given the particular inputs. We consider KPIs such as life cycle assessment impacts, but also natural habitat and other ecosystem service metrics. Next one, please. So, okay, so now it's time. I'll show you how it looks. So if you let me, I will share my screen. Window. All right. Please confirm if you can see it.
Yep.
All right. So what we did with this series of machine learning models is that we plugged it into a web application that is the FrameTest web tool. And we're supposed to use it as a resource for exploration and identification of important parameters, but also for testing, and we call it a sandbox. So this FrameTest sandbox starts with a different set of questions, which was basically our effort of converting these sometimes obscure, complicated parameters into understandable questions. For instance, we have a first section dedicated on asking, how does the farming landscape look like? The first question is, how large are the agricultural fields in hectares? So you can simply slide this button and select the one you want to evaluate. We're also asking how much variation exists on the different fields that we want to generate. And it's easy by just selecting that. In some cases, it's not so easy to understand what are we asking, like landscape feature aggregation. And for that, we also provide a help button that can give the user some idea of what this precise question is asking. The logic here is to convert the general knowledge that a user may have about the system into a quantitative range of values or a quantitative number that can be entered in the model. Something important to mention here is that this is not covering the whole parameter space of the model, because it's impossible to cover. We had to pre-calibrate and pre-select the ranges on which the farming system is working the way we expect it to work. So as I mentioned here, the first section is dedicated for farming landscape. We ask the size of the variation. Yeah, so once we complete that, I don't know, let's go here. We can go to next. The next block is asking some farmers' characteristics. And the idea is to inquire information about the different cognitive factors that influence farmers' decision. Something that we need to acknowledge here is that the model depends on many other parameters, especially the FarmMind framework that we use, but we try to simplify it in the sensitivity analysis, and we identify those that really affect the most our particular specific application of the model. So one example is, how tolerant are farmers to losses? So this is a generic question, and you can say, yeah, this is a group of farmers that are highly tolerant to losses, or maybe not, very low. This is translated into parameters values. For instance, for this example, this particular number is used to calculate the reference income, because we do not have empirical data of what is the reference income of each farmer. That's very specific. You get that from surveys, but we can somehow estimate it or approximate it by calculating how tolerant a farmer is to losses. It's converted through some equations in the model, similar to how tolerant are farmers to dissimilarity. Basically, it means what is the threshold for becoming a social agent that it's more likely to comply to social norms. And how much arable land do farmers preserve for production? In our model, since it's an optimization model, we need to define some constraints. And one important parameter we use is the available land, or the how much land is going to be used for production. If I select 0.9, it means that during the simulation, farmers would only use up to 10% of the total land to be converted into either hedgerows or forest strips or any other land type. Once this is complete, we ask questions about economic incentives related with basically policy frameworks. So in our model and in the experimentation we are doing, we are focusing on subsidies. So here the question is, what is the hedgerow subsidy amount measured in euros per hectare a year? And we do the same for margin, semi-natural habitats, and buffer areas. And basically, this is controlled by the user. You can say, I don't want to give any kind of subsidy, and let's see the result. Or you can say, I'm going to give more subsidy to hedgerows and less for semi-natural habitat. This is, of course, external to the model. It is controlled by the user. Finally, we have another parameter that is referring to the opportunity cost. In the model, we call it cluster fee, which is what is the cost of being part of the cluster. It can be translated into a payment of I don't know, the facilitator, or attending to the meetings, or spending some budget in certain activities. It's supposed to be quantified here. So it could be from, I don't know, 1,000 euros per year, or we tested until 3,000 euros. I'm gonna leave it like this. Finally, we're asking questions about the efficiency of the ecosystem services. Since, as I mentioned in the previous example, the model outcome depends on these feedback, substitution feedback, we need to know how effective it is. How effective is the substitution provided by aerial pest control, ground-based pest control, and how can the production yield increase by pollination? Something important here is that although we have managed to quantify the different ecosystem services provided, you do not have information of how effective these are in the specific case study. So this is a parameter that deserves exploration. This is basically what we want to test. We want to see in which conditions, under which conditions the farmer cluster might be successful or might be effective, generating given the outcomes that we need. If we are in situations in which we need a very, very high effective pest control, it might mean that some regions might not be the best for implementing these systems. So this is an important parameter. So we complete, and then we're gonna go to the Explorer. So the Explorer basically takes all the previous initial conditions and it puts it into it makes predictions, and we can see the predictions for different types of impacts. So we have one model for each impact, and that's on the y-axis. Here we can see biomass measured in tons per hectare, and also we can plot on the x-axis all the possible values of the different parameters. So if we see here, what this figure means is that for the biomass accounted in tons per hectare, if the subsidy of hedgerows is 0, the quantity is going to be around 3 tons per hectare. But after passing approximately 500 euros per hectare, this amount of biomass is going to increase. So the more I increase the subsidy, the more biomass is going to be increased. That's the logic. It's exploration one, so we can still also explore other types of metrics. For instance, here we have margin subsidy. So in this example, we see that it actually decreases. So at some point, if I increase the margin, the subsidy for margin areas, the biomass decreases. And when I saw this first, I was like a bit confused about why does it happen. And then when we see the simulation, it's basically because farmers would prefer to go for margin, and the capacity for for generating this biomass metric is not the same as the other ones, as semi-natural habitat or heteros. So basically, you are choosing a non-optimal subsidy for this particular metric. We can also change the variables or the parameters to explore more cognitive-oriented metrics, such as the dissimilarity tolerance. In this example, basically what we see is that the dissimilarity tolerance, as I mentioned, indicates the limit over which the farmer feels like it needs to be like the rest, not happy to be different. So as I presented in the chart, when the farmer exceeds this threshold and is not happy with the income, is going to opt out, meaning that the higher the threshold, the less likely for the farmer to opt out. Yes, so we could do the same for also life cycle impact metrics. So we can spy the similarity and also subsidies. We see how this changes. It's important to understand that this is depending on the initial conditions we established, because if I reset the, oops, okay, my bad. Go again here. Yes. When I reset with the default values that we tuned or calibrated, of course, the results change. As you can see here the substitution is more dramatic. Of course, to explain this, we would have to see the combination that led to this particular trend. Now, for that, there might be situations we want to actually compare 2 or 3 or many combination of parameters. We can call this a policy. And basically, in the compare tab, we have a upper table for predictors that allows us to modify each one of the predictors that we already ingested in the beginning of the demo. And what we can do here is we observe the prediction of these predictors. These are the values for each one of the metrics, and this is the location in an axis of this prediction. What we could do here is to take this set of inputs and populate them again, and now we have 2 of them that have the same value. But what we could do is we could also maybe decrease the hetero subsidy and compare 2 scenarios, one with 600 euros per hectare of hetero subsidy and one with 0. And then here we can see the predictions. For the first one is a red circle, and for the second one, the green square. In the chart, we can compare, or we can benchmark different policies or combination in reference to a main one, if we can call it like that. So in this example, when we reduce the subsidy to 0, no much hetero subsidy, the life cycle impact, this is per hectare, increases in comparison to having subsidy. And also arable land, which is calculated by the model, it increases because less transformation occurs. We can do this not only with 2, we can also have many different combinations to evaluate and then determine what is better for us. So that's the idea of this chart. So these are the 2 main tabs that FrameTest is providing, and they, of course, strongly depend on how our model was trained, the machine learning model was trained. In this example, I'm using the machine learning model trained with a Luxembourgish ABM that was calibrated and is still in the process of calibration for some parameters for the Luxembourgish context, meaning that, of course, the FrameTest cannot be FrameTest if it's not coupled with Frame ABM, meaning that once you identify important parameters or important features, it is important to do an in-depth analysis and to really understand the mechanisms and the why. In FrameTest, we can introduce system conditions and somehow speculate how the system average looks. We can get them from distributions, from empirical data, but we cannot model explicitly the heterogeneity of each one of the farmers if we want to study a particular farming system. But for that, we're also providing a tool, the Farming Simulation Viewer, which basically helps to visualize simulation results. So I'm not going to explain FrameABM. FrameABM it's a agent-based model. It's a bit more take more time to explain. But in this tool, we are allowing users to see the results of a simulation. For instance, these are the results of the simulation. It's a huge table. We see the farmer, the day, and every action that they take, and all the accounted metrics. We can see how the social network looks according on the parameters we initially introduced. We can see how each farmer decreases or increases their impact depending on what we want to study. And the important thing here is that we can also see how in this simulation, what is the land substitution dynamic. We also provide graphics to understand how was the strategy transition or the strategy changes during the simulation. So in a nutshell, to close, this is FrameTest. Claudio, I think we can go back to the slides so I can talk. No, okay, I'm going to close this first and then we'll go back to the slide. So this is FrameTest. It's a web tool. We are planning on serving it in our servers, but we're also going to provide it as a package. But I'm going to explain that later. So if you let me, I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay, I will resume. So thank you, Gustavo. I think I would like to quickly open the floor. Just if there are some urgent questions on the demo, maybe some question about the workflow steps, the scenario setup, the parameters, or something really on the point. For bigger question or design ideas, I would wait for the final discussion. But if there are some urgent question about the demo and what we've just seen on how the tool is designed, I think it's better to take it now. Anybody from the audience?
Yes, good morning. Thanks, Claudio and Gustavo. It's great work. I have just a quick, I don't want to say that I'm lost. I mean, it's great, it's fantastic. It's just the first step. When you created the ABM, in your specific case, you started from data that you already had at your institute in your database, or you discussed something with the farmers? You had some meetings. Some of these socio-ecological parameters that they are using for creating the ABM are it's something that you already had, or something that you discussed with them you got through interviews, or what was? I missed the first element, the first step when you created the ABM model. Thanks.
Yes. So basically, it's a combination of theoretical components, like based on literature, and some components that are based on the data we have. So what we are using from our databases are all related with the production part. So we have models of the life cycle impacts of production of rye, wheat, maize, etc., cost information, and also price information. So that's what describes the system. But we do not have information of a specific agent, because our idea was to first have a parameterized model that could be calibrated for with data of specific systems to then be analyzed at detail. So you are right. Information about behavioral components, we don't have them because they need to be obtained by surveys. And in this example, we were testing these 4 particular actions, but if we consider that there are other actions that are more relevant for a particular context, we could introduce them to model. Maybe that would need a bit more of research, because for each action, we need to think about what does it mean, what does it imply, and model into the ABM. So the farmers are generated randomly using this farm population model that Claudio developed. It's a generator of farm landscape based on landscape features. So these landscape features Claudio was based on literature to obtain what is the average configuration of a farm landscape. So that's the starting point. Ideally is that once we want to address one specific cluster, we need to customize these features to the specific cluster. and we don't have this at the moment. We have the model, and we are exploring and evaluating squeezing the model to see all the dependencies of variables.
Yeah, if I can add to that, just to be practical, when you want to generate a virtual landscape, you are asked, there are some questions at the beginning, but basically you should have already data about how how many fields on average do a farm normally have in your region, and what is the size of the fields, what is the density of hedgerows, so kilometers per hectare of hedgerow already present. So you need to provide some initial condition that may come from data that you have. And if you are uncertain about one specific value, say, in my region, I have no idea, there has not been a survey on my how many buffers are around ditches presently. So for that you can tell a range, and then you move that range and see if it really affects the final results. And concerning the data that we are using, as said, we leverage previous surveys that we did. So we had a database of how farming is in Luxembourg, which I believe is not very different from how farming is in Central Europe. But yes, that was the base we used. But we used that because it was quite detailed and reflecting the local condition we have. But we could use more general databases as Agribalise, for instance, that have a lot of agricultural processes in terms of life cycle impacts. So that could be a source. I hope this helps.
Sure, no, thanks a lot. It's very great. Considering the information that you used, I think that the results that you can get, it's not so coarse, or it cannot be tailored specifically to a specific context yet. But on average, as you mentioned, maybe for the average farm in Europe, it makes sense. So it explains something, and it can be used for simulations. It's quite interesting. Thanks. What's the name? Could you please repeat the name of the database that you mentioned, the last one, the agricultural database that you mentioned?
Yeah, it's Agribalise.
Agribalise. Yes, I never heard of it. Thanks.
So I just wanted to make a clarification that we didn't mention during the demo. We assume, for the moment, we have the assumption that when a landscape feature is put in place, you cannot revert back. So if you create a semi-natural habitat and then you leave the cluster, you cannot reconvert that semi-natural habitat back to agricultural land and start growing crops there. So that was a little bit explaining why in the graph that Gustavo showed, when you see that they leave the clusters, the situation stays status quo. It's basically because they cannot revert back. But this is a parameter, or let's say a specificity of the model that can be changed. So what are the next step that we have planned, and a little bit on how to access the tool and operate it?
Yes, thank you, Claudio. So, well, as I was mentioning before, FrameTest we believe that cannot coexist without FrameABM. It's a surrogate model, highly coupled with the agent-based model that generates it. So we're going to release the FrameABM model, which is basically the package, the code, and all the resources to run it as an open source package, including the dashboard, which includes the dashboard that I mentioned. The idea is to, although it's important to have some programming, it's important to feel comfortable with coding. It's a tool written in Python. The whole simulation is written in Python, but it has an interface in which you just need to introduce the variables as text. So then somehow, if you're not interested in modifying the structure, you can also use the FrameABM. But if people want to expand the model and customize it for a particular farming system or calibrate it for other systems, then it's ideal to use FrameABM. Next one, please. At the same time, we're planning on releasing FrameTest, the tool we have, probably in coming weeks or maybe months. Claudio will have to discuss that, but we are planning on incorporating more LCA data into the model. We are at the moment modeling just a certain number of crops. We want to include as many as we consider relevant, and also keep fine-tuning and keep calibrating it for the Luxembourgish context. We'll try to make it a very more specific for the Luxembourgish context. So that's the plan we have. The important thing here is that you can train your own FrameTest model, meaning that the package, the FrameABM package, gives you the code, the data that you can use to populate your own surrogate models for data exploration, or for creating also customized surrogate models for other types of agricultural systems. So I invite you to keep a look at the Recodo, pay attention to the website, because probably there's going to be the first place where we're going to release it.
Yes, and if you need, we will publish also the documentation to do all these steps that they seem scary. But of course, we don't expect any policymaker to do it directly. But if you can either contact us and see if we can adapt it to your context, or if you have a university and a group of researchers which you already are working with, we are happy also to have other contributing to the development of, especially to the FrameABM. So if you need to tweak our original code that, as Gustavo said, is really Central European oriented, and adapt it to your context, maybe, I don't know, UK or Southern Europe, then we are happy also to share the material. Everything is open source, and we are interested to see if this could really support policy making, but also decision making. For instance, along the supply chain, I see that could be a development. Now is the wholesaler is just a very simple agent, but it could be further explored and improved. Another information to share is that we are also working, not yet, but we are discussing the possibility of extending this concept, so combining an agent-based model within the agricultural sector with machine learning for other applications, so not only for agro-biodiversity sensitive practice, but maybe into different breeding strategies or other aspects. So what we think is interesting is really coupling the two the different methodologies that we have here. So as a recap, the agent-based model to generate this virtual environment in which agents interact and represent a complex system, the layer of life cycle assessment to basically evaluate the environmental impact of each action that is taking place in the system, the ecosystem services assessment, even if it's on a virtual landscape, and finally the machine learning to try to simplify the extraction of information for such complex models. So run many simulations with different set of initial parameters, and then use machine learning to understand how the KPI are correlated to the set of initial parameters. Okay, so I think we are close to the end. I would like to reopen the floor for a final round of questions. If somebody has some very general question about adapting FrameTest, for instance, to your context, or question about specific data integration, how uncertainty is managed, if you are, for instance, considering a pilot, and what are, like, if during this talk you thought, this tool could be very useful for that specific case, we would like to know. So this any type of feedback and immediate interaction would be highly appreciated. So I can stop sharing and reopen the floor if somebody has something to add. Yes. Iris, hello.
Thanks, Claudio and Gustavo. It was a great presentation, lots of insights, but also raising a lot more new questions. So, Gustavo, you mentioned that you will adjust the model to the Luxembourgish context. So, will it be for the national level, including a whole range of different farming systems? I'm just thinking about the Luxembourgish farmer cluster, which is probably not really representing overall Luxembourg, but maybe, a grassland system, which we have across Europe. So the question is it more at the national level, including a lot of farming systems, or would it be now tailored towards very specific farming systems?
So for the moment is we're only addressing crops, and because we're based on data, arable, yeah, and based using data that was already obtained in another project, and so there. When we say context, it has different layers, because there's context in terms of farmers' behaviors and how they act, how they think, and assumptions. There's context in terms also in the production system itself, the technologies that are used. That's very it concerns in life cycle assessment. So in our case, when we say context, we are mainly talking about the production system. The behavioral part is still relying on a series of parameters and distributions that we calibrated to generate the model. To using these behavioral models that I mentioned, the theories and I mentioned before, try to recreate the functioning of the system, but it's not calibrated to a real farming system, because we need to always have this dance between how generic you want to be for the analysis, especially in this work package. The analysis wants to be broader, and how specific you want to be for a specific action. And so we are in the middle. Regarding the technical part, I think we have covered a great portion of the technologies that are used in the Luxembourgish context. And if you would like to include other types of system, it's a matter of collecting data on the technological functioning of that system, which is very similar to how you do any LCA assessment surveys that you commonly do for that.
Yes, if I can add some rationale just to explain. So you well know all the clusters that we have, and when we had to decide what to model, initially the very first prototype was done on orchard system, because that was our cluster main, what was about the cluster. But then we realized that maybe they were a very niche sector within the broader agricultural sector. So we said, okay, if we have to invest within the end of the project, let's try to go for arable, which was let's say the most common one. But then so we decided that the main structure and what we would like to represent were mostly arable system, and for two reasons. One, I already mentioned it, because it's very common. Second, because we can easily then integrate mixed systems and convert some arable into grassland and add a second part of the model related to that. But so that was the rationale. And then we decided to, since we had very specific data for the arable activities in Luxembourg, we say, yeah, let's go as realistic as possible to show how the tool would look like in a situation in which you have that specific information for your context. So now, in terms of applicability, would I use the tool directly one-to-one in Czech Republic? Maybe at the beginning, but if we then we should the first thing I would do is saying, okay, these are the assumptions. This is I can tell you in words what they do for maize, what is done in Luxembourg to grow barley, and so on and so forth. Does it meet what you do there? Yes or no? And then tweak the parameters there and rerun the analysis with the new parameters. So that's the degree of transfer of the tool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as you said, it's always the balance between the detail and the general features that you include in the model, and how applicable it would then be to specific contexts. So thanks for clarification on that.
And another thing that I think it's important to mention is that, let's say that in your own context there is one aspect that is very, very important, and is not included in our current model, right? So for instance, I've no example now and on the tip of my tongue, but let's say that there is something very peculiar, and we could easily add that as one of the input parameters and let change those. So the customization of frame ABM, so the first part, it requires a cost. It has an initial cost, but then it's very, very easy to adapt to a local condition. And then, but you can, I mean, very often in the agent-based model, you select one parameter and you have the result, and that's already a lot of work. What we are trying to do here is that instead of selecting one level of the parameter, give me the interval you're interested in. We run for you a lot of simulation, or the tool does for you a lot of simulation, and then we explore all the space of parameter and see how results are sensitive to this initial parameter. And you can do it every day and come back to what you thought at the beginning and revisit it. So that, I think, is one of the main advantages of this approach.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Any other question? Yeah.
Thank you very much, guys. I just had a really quick question which related to some questions I got myself at a conference in Germany over the summer. There was some interest from the private sector in terms of what has happened in the UK, where businesses do offsetting or credit schemes or in some way support cluster-like groups of farmers in a certain area. And I was just wondering how useful FrameTest would be for a business looking to assess the cluster approach and maybe either use that in decision making to support a collective group of farmers in a certain area, or indeed once they've done so to sort of in a more generic way or an aggregate way be able to then report that sort of within their business or externally. So yeah, apologies if it's already partly been answered, but that was just something that popped into my head.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah,
I just want to mention that there are two layers of adaptation of the tool. One has to do with the parameters, when you by yourself obtain the parameters and you calculate something, and the other has to do with the structure. And the structure means modifying the code, introducing new rationale, new rules, new ways on how the agents, or new aspects that you want to simulate. So the tool, how it is right now, is customized for the farming sector. The technology that is built on, which are the simulator and the frameworks and the models, those can be reutilized in a new research question. If that's what you're asking. So from my experience with using the tool and working on it, is like the technologies that we provide can let you do that. The tool, how it is, it's not designed for that.
Interesting. Okay.
Yes. What I would like to add is that if I had to work with a company, let's say that is they say, okay, we want to know what are the impacts of an offsetting scheme in a specific region in UK. How I would be the project is say, okay, first let's do data collection to calibrate really the model to your site. Second step is let's validate a baseline. So we want our model be able to reproduce, for instance, 2 or 3 important KPI for your landscape. One could be production, how try to rebuild the landscape and see how far the model goes. So once we have that proven, the following step would be what Gustavo just mentioned, is let's change a little bit the structure, because of course this is not a subsidy, that's a different way, but it's still a transfer payment, right, for some action. So model that in, run the simulation with the company in an iterative way, maybe 2 or 3 iterations. And then when we all agree that is what they wanted, try to do exploration. And that's the final phase. Well, of course, we could never validate a what-if scenario, because we never have the counterfactual, right? But at least the validation can be on some baseline, and then trust the model, and that's the best thing we can do for the moment.
Interesting. Thank you. That's really useful. Thank you.
Any other question? Otherwise, I think it's 1 o'clock, so we are perfectly on time. So I want to thank you all for your patience and bearing with us until the end. So I hope you discover something new. And yeah, I want to share just one slide because there are our contacts there. So you can take a note and write us back at the end. Yeah, Gustavo and myself, you can take a note or a screenshot of this and reach back to us if you are interested to know more. With this, I want to thank you all, and I wish you a nice continuation of your day.